Okay, another like desultory attempt to engage the plot. So let's take the image of a record player. Once it's engaged, the record spinning forever in the same way as nature. So I've been thinking over these issues we were talking about in the first Alberto Ghibellini prompted from the introduction in the first chapter of his book on the revival of natural philosophizing, Leo Strauss, the revival of natural philosophizing. This eternal return in Nietzsche, let's liken that to the record spinning forever, but in the following sense. We have the opinions in the polis. So, for instance, the dispute between Locus and Nicias in the very dialogue which Leo Strauss is first and stricken or somehow entangled by and thereby determined to go into philosophy for the rest of his life, the Locus. There, you get in the middle of the dialogue, characteristically, you get this mention of arete, or virtue, and then you'll go into a discussion on Andrea, or courage, whereby there's a challenge of the doxa, or so-called. I'm always not at ease with the word opinion. It sounds wrong somehow. The doxa. Of course, that sounds almost like getting doxed or something. But in a way that's almost, it's totally arbitrary, but it kind of doxa sounds like something that needs to be fixed. You have the record player and all these doxa, and then Strauss is saying you're supposed to einfach, or simple, in the positive sense, images that we go from the doxa to this sort of, I guess, to aletheia would be the way to put it, to the truth, through this Socratic so-called second sailing, as he puts it in the one of the dialogues. Through speeches, through discourses, through the logoi, or how should we put it, logoi, with an I at the end, plural. So many things are easily forgotten. So but anyway, let me complete this image first. Not genuinely forgotten. So this is part of the, I justify this way. This is part of the superimposing this is really an essential part of the whole idea. There's things that are kind of scattered, and then we gather them, or there's a record player that hasn't been engaged, and then we set it going. And if it's playing the right music, then we can have the eternal return. But you can see how Nietzsche's thinking here in a way, in close proximity to this everything. I think the best simple version of the eternal return is, again, I've been saying this for a long time, is again the meditation out of season on the uses and abuses of history for life. You find one form, so Gothic architecture, for instance, or the Prussian way of doing government as understood by Hegel, certain modifications in Hegel, and then you say, let's play this record forever. It's the eternal return of the same. Then you could see Nietzsche's point in a certain way. You just wouldn't want to do that. You'd want to change the record at some point. And then we have this kind of sense that in the locus we're going from, the record isn't yet engaged. There's just this word Andrea. We haven't meditated over it. We haven't reached the point in the Phaedo. Let me read something from that, actually. So they're talking about the second sailing of Socrates, the Deuteros Plus, or second voyage, maybe is a nicer way to put it. And there's basically this discussion, do you wish me, Cebes, said he, to give you an account of the way in which I have conducted my second voyage in quest of the cause. I'd given up investigating things of the senses, translated realities. I came to the view that and then he says something like, I came to the view that people that stare at the sun go blind, and then what they have to do if they want to see an eclipse or something is do something along the lines of looks at it, a reflection as in water. So we think of this move from pistis to pistis is basic reliance on the senses to the second part of the divided line, the second lower part of the divided line, which I forget what it's called, but the higher ones are, of course, episteme and nous. So there's just the senses, and then there's a reflection, and then he makes this metaphor of the logoi being like looking at the sun in a reflection. I need this mirror. So let's put it that way. You're in life, you're in nature, you're in the Zuhanden, and then you go into this when Strauss was young and Husserl was big. Husserl is characterizing as this move from the Natureinstellung, or natural attitude, to the theoretical attitude, theoretical Einstellung. And Heidegger's, and so this is actually, the more we could sort this out, the more we could see what the actual dispute over this, whether Heidegger and Strauss are ultimately trying to do the same thing. It seems that the Greek word for nature, physis, means primarily growth. So I left that out last time. That was the part that I left out. Oh, so by the way, let me give one image of just how memory works in this sense. Like, so of course, if you've been, people don't realize this, but if you've been studying something for 30 years or whatever, then it happens you forget huge amounts of things, and also lots of things aren't on the tip of your tongue or on your ready memory, right? So I remember once talking to a dense person. Like, by dense I mean somebody like O.J. Simpson, or which we usually call a dumb jock, who got in the habit of continuously accusing people of not knowing things that they certainly did know, but which they couldn't adduce immediately off the top of their head. So that often happens. You have this huge store of things, but you haven't been thinking about them recently. We have older gentlemen, for instance, around Cafe Strada, Jovan, who was studied infinite number of things, but then you often talk to him and he says, well, I haven't been thinking about that recently. I haven't been thinking about that just now. So of course, if you're 80 years old, or older, and you've been studying things all your life, that doesn't mean you've simply forgotten everything, but you haven't. It's not in your working vocabulary necessarily if you haven't reviewed it recently. And even Strauss himself would sometimes say, as he was getting older, he would say, is there anyone who's read this recently? Because they can't trust my memory necessarily. It could be an error if I haven't reviewed it recently. So that can often happen. But I think that that image overlays nicely. So that can be something. But so in this case, here's one actual instance where the cure worked, but I think the cure is maybe not at the same level as Socrates once, which is so then after several months had gone on with this inane accusations, it struck me that I said, well, listen, there's something that you already know that you're doing. I said, there's a difference between our total memory and our working memory. And of course, he had heard that in school and so on. And he said, I agree with that. So he agreed, and in fact, he agreed with it immediately. But then the further question recurs, I think, is whether the agreement came simply because this had been drilled into him in school, or whether it's like a genuine agreement out of the not a non-polemical agreement, as Ghibellini is thematizing this issue in the early Strauss, where Strauss is saying we need not a polemic but a genuine access to the things. I wrote down something about that. The Welt anschauen. No, sorry, that's nothing to do with this. A recognition or anerkennung, rather than polemics. The pure, unpolemical, the pure and whole anerkennung, recognition, the view of nature rather than polemics. This is one theme that he's bringing out. And then I try to say here, isn't this so the recognition would be actually seeing that happened, right? That happens, and especially maybe from one's own inner, or from one's, just say, let's forget about inner and external, just say from one's own observation that one knows something, but that happens all the time. You have to recollect something, but you realize it's there somewhere in the back of your mind, and then you set yourself towards it, and then it could take a while, but eventually you recollect it. Sometimes it could take hours, sometimes often if you just concentrate, you can get it in a few minutes, right? But you don't have it right away. So you could see there is a difference between this, just in that sense. So, but then we want to know, how much is something, these other cases like that, and when are we doing that? So this is just an attempt to thematize the first cave as against the second cave, and to kind of jostle into this Ghibellini subjects. And then also I want to make an attempt to link this up with Heidegger. Strauss speaks somewhere about this paradoxia des unscheinbaren alten ewigen, the paradox of the inconspicuous old eternal. So there's something tricky about that, right? Because it's like you're in the world of opinions. So, for instance, what I was getting at is, Locke is being sort of this old school kind of guy who just keeps insisting, well, the way we use the word Andrea is that lions have courage and men have courage. And then Nicias, who it so happens is the richest man in Athens, so I'm not sure why that comes in. But he takes the other side that we should only understand courage to be that which involves some understanding of what's happening, which then therefore has to come from discussion or I don't know if they insist it has to come from discussion or logos, but that it has to somehow, well, people have to understand what's happening. Otherwise, it's just a case of a fool rushing in or a dumb animal, a lion rushing in, and then they don't want to. They say we should distinguish this, and this word isn't being used properly, and let's remember the proper use of this word. Let's remember what really makes sense. I think of cases that are close to this, like Strauss is often talking about. That's certain that we have to make the decisions ourselves from our own time, but there could be certain principles that come from the base of the first cave and are perfectly founded, such as Strauss says that in a vote, the person who gets more votes must win. So I guess that we have to settle that in the American situation. If we add Canada, then we have an even more complicated situation with regard to the I have no expectation Canada's going to be added to the United States. That will never happen. But maybe in 1,000 years, but under a totally different situation. But then the electoral vote count would have to change, right? But so we don't actually handle the vote by we don't handle the election by a vote, right? But a vote is involved. So it's interesting on this point that all these complicated questions come in. So you could say when Trump lost the popular vote the first time he won the electoral vote by like 3 million votes, then quite a few Trumpians felt the need to insist that there were at least 10 million illegal aliens voting to make up for that, because they felt somehow that this is important. The popular vote and voting was important, and this somehow seems to have a cogency, a principal cogency to it, this voting issue. And the current one, and in the recent election, they're certainly happy that they won the popular vote, and they bring that out. So obviously, even though that's not the way we handle the election, it seems to have some cogency. And then you could ask, how much is that a permanent feature of man as man? Do they think the vote matters in that way? And how much is it an error? I think that way seems to me to lead to lots of problems, because then you get into a kind of a question of, couldn't there be a selective breeding towards the ones that don't think that, and isn't Socrates himself against something like that? Because isn't anybody that's sensible against merely saying what most people think isn't what's right? It would come into this idiot Zizek type of thing where he said there's some kind of wise word on each side, you know, and the lawyers say that themselves, right? Not numbers, but the weightiness of the argument. And there would be the arguments for both sides of that. I don't know. That would get into a lot of trouble, but it does show kind of one of the issues. So let's look at this question. This is Strauss. Recovery of Plato's problems by means of a historische destruction that, unlike Heidegger's aim, or maybe this is Ghibellini, I'm not sure. Unlike Heidegger's aim is to unearth the conditions for the genuinely ahistorical natural philosophizing. Now, why do we have this insistence that Heidegger is doing something different? I think that's where I want to try to break in and say it's not that obvious. So in the Heidegger is saying in the one thing Heidegger says that yeah, even the concept of history is very questionable. So he doesn't accept, if historicism just means the Hegel version, we're always in the present of our time and we're always speaking from our time. Heidegger surely doesn't accept that. You can see that in the book on German idealism, in the second Hegel book. He complicates that and says we don't know like where we're standing. So there can't be a history simply in this Hegelian sense. It doesn't make sense. But one thing he says is the genuinely metaphysical accomplishment of the freedom essay is the establishment of an original concept of being. So the point there Heidegger is making is the Greek concept of availability, being as availability or onves in the real estate. This is his first order thing that he's saying. Look, Schelling has shown us how to we don't have to stay with it. And we have a different ground of being. Now you could say, yeah, in a way, this is what I would say, in a way, when Heidegger does his radical deconstruction of Aristotle, including metaphysics or first philosophy, laws of thought, including law of identity, we could still step back from that and say, look, Socrates is now asking this question, the Sein Frage. Why can't Socrates ask the Sein Frage? So then this is there's something complicated in there that's not totally clear to me about why Heidegger, so I believe he does have a sort of precise reasons for this, but it's not so obvious. Why can't we take up the Sein Frage from the same position of the Einfach, or simple version of philosophy, as Strauss says it, as the movement from the doxa from the opinions to the truth, through speech. So now without answering that directly, let's look at one issue Strauss is often thematizing, which is that there's this for all practical purposes, the university's changed views from the Aristotelian view. Aristotle is still in power at the time of, in the 17th century or so. It's been contested by Descartes, by Spinoza. We have this pantheismus straight. We have the coming in of atheism with Descartes. Yeah, so like for instance, Descartes, that's another issue of it. So Descartes brings in basically atheism, but then people are now confused over that because doesn't Descartes have some version of Anselm's ontological argument in the Meditations and blah blah blah? But no, actually, he doesn't have any. Is just an atheist. I think Descartes is just an atheist. What he's doing there is saying, how do we know that so what is pantheism straight or Spinoza straight? Spinoza controversy. It's basically you say God isn't a person, and that means there's no intelligence. There's no intelligence there. There's no will or intelligence. And then this is basically atheism. But then you still want to prove that the material universe has some most perfect basis to its deterministic foundations. So that there's a foundation behind the Cartesian grid and behind everything that Descartes can build up. And that's what he's trying to prove there. He's not trying to prove. So it's really, really when we say deism, we're really saying atheism. I think that's because basically the other way to say that is it's not a personal God. It's not it's not a living God. It's the whole taken in some non-moral sense. And actually, Yeah, there's all kinds of problems with that. But okay, but Hobbes, but let's go beyond that, because Hobbes doesn't simply fall prey to that. Hobbes, we should remember, Hobbes had all these polemics with people like Boyle and over the issue of the vacuum and all this stuff, and Galileo and the mechanical worldview, which he didn't really accept. But what does Hobbes do is really he says, let's get rid of the higher parts, the rational part, the higher rational parts, not of our philosophizing, but in our analysis of politics, not of our philosophizing as a whole, not of metaphysics. We still accept these large metaphysical problems, but when we're analyzing human behavior, this is where you get the American view. We say, and Strauss is like constantly repeating this, we say, this starting point is kind of, at least from Strauss's point of view, Strauss has a tendency to give a kind of like strong, simple view to things, which is, maybe it's good, maybe it's bad, but I think the way he wants to communicate it is this simple notion that, straightforward notion that as oft as reason is against a man, man will be against the reason, means as long as you allow in politics high conceptual issues, you can never get any agreement. Therefore, you must have a vote, because a vote means we treat everyone as equal, no matter how stupid. There's a nice thing by Ivan Ilyin, the Russian guy that Putin likes, about the vote. I recommend that to everyone. I think it's simply correct. It just, so why does it make any sense? It makes sense in this Hobbesian way, and this plays a big role in American politics. Is always worrying about things like, the way that interest controls our reasoning, right? That our reasoning will always follow our interests, and that intelligence is simpliciter is not to be found. So, for instance, like some time ago, there's some contest in the Congress over, like, how is it that the Congress members are doing this terrible thing called self-dealing, whereby they decide on their own salaries, and then something had to be worked out, like along the line of because once you start discussing something like that, and then it's kind of like there could get to be two camps, and somebody says, oh well, we'll have to have a salary pegged to the GDP or something, or we'll have to have some kind of pegging that's independent, and there'll have to be some red line objectivity, and but then somebody else comes in and says, well, we have to build a new gymnasium and swimming pool, and we need upgrades to the underground metro system that takes in the senators in and out to make it more like a genuine first-class experience. And you could add all kinds of amenities, and then you could see where you keep getting into complications. It's not that easy to decide on what their real salary is if you count they get free flights, what do they get off. There are all kinds of questions, and sophistry comes in, and eventually you forget what you were even arguing about, and you get two parties pushing different ways. And so this kind of, you could see where Hobbesian analysis of passions, let's create so then you get the concept, the totally dominant idea in the university is the idea of the institutional structure. And then you got this idea through changing the institutional structure, then you can guard against the self-dealing of the rulers and stuff like that. So I think Hobbes is thinking, it's the starting point of Hobbes' thinking is there is something to analyze there, which isn't just like physics, it's passionate interest, the so-called realism. But everything above that we throw out. I think that's the core of the American system. Everything above that we throw out. But then the point in this context of bringing this up is that what Strauss is saying is when this Yeah, Keynes talks about the animal spirits, right? The economist, Keynesian economics, and the animal spirits. That's Hobbesian. Once you rule out the possibility of rational deliberation, we're told there was supposed to be high quality deliberation in the Senate, and a libertarian once quoted that to me: high quality deliberation in the Senate and then the Democratic House. But that's bullshit. The reason, James Madison says it himself in the Federalist Papers, the reason we have the Senate is to guard the interests of those people who would be totally misunderstood. Those who, I forget the quote, is who loll on their couches and roll in their carriages, something like that. Who would be totally misunderstood by the masses, so that the masses don't decide to squash the opulent minority. So they don't want the masses to squash the opulent minority. So that, I don't think. Now that's the problem. That reminds me of this issues like when Fritz Lang came over. Fritz Lang, who on high principle, refused to become the head Nazi film director, and came over to Hollywood and got treated like rubbish, and made all these B movies. He wanted to make some movie that had a complicated moral twist where the people wanted to lynch some guy. Their instincts kind of tingled, and they knew this guy needed to be lynched. And then Fritz Lang wanted there to be a twist in the plot where the guy got exonerated, but then it came out that he was really turned out to be guilty. But they wouldn't let him make that movie because it seemed to be too morally confusing. I think from Lang's point of view, so what if the mob happens to have gotten it right? He doesn't believe they're still wrong. They just happened on that occasion to get it right. I think if you talk to Trumpians, it's impossible to explain something like that to them, because they're, on the whole, they won't believe it. Somehow, there's some element of the whole Trumpian thing has this strong Hobbesian feel about it in that sense. The ridiculous way to put it, I suppose, is this idiot notion of the wisdom of the crowds, or however it's called, this magical thinking notion. But okay, so the point is, part of what the second cave means is the actual conditions you've grown into, so nature has nothing to do with growth, are the conditions of this Hobbesian analysis, and a government based on that, and of course there's other elements, Montesquieu and so on, many other elements. But maybe the essence of it is somewhat like man is this passionate being restlessly drawn on by power after power unto death, and he needs to, only by changing the institutional structure can we get the that twisted timber of humanity, as Kant puts it, into order. But so then Strauss's point is, if you're in the midst of that, how can you not have a polemic against it? So like, for instance, Strauss found it increasingly difficult to justify what he was teaching in the political philosophy department or political science department. And he eventually moved over, I believe, to, I think it's a Catholic university or so. Because, of course, they had the older way of thinking about Plato, and they accepted it without further ado. There was no need to justifications of Strauss's way of approaching the issues. But if the whole world you're in is this modern world, and you want to try to get to the first cave, then there's all kinds of proximate difficulties. But then Strauss wants to say, Yeah, I think we could say the proximate difficulties are just that. They're not difficulties in principle. So that's in a way a relief, even though if it might be very miserable if it's totally impracticable to overcome it. Now let me try to make one first blush at a finer point on this Strauss versus Heidegger issue. So one possible and this is also linked up, we should link this up to how Edmund Husserl, after reading Being in Time, said, well, you, Heidegger, have just given us a picture of natural philosophizing. So what? I've heard this before. But whereas what Heidegger wants to say is, all the time I was thinking of being. So that's what he says in his answer to its critics in the second Schelling seminar book. And I think that's what I want to try to do, is to show some of the contours of that. So I think the easiest way to look at that is that the natural attitude is the attitude prior to what Socrates says in the Phaedo, prior to the second voyage. The second voyage is what Husserl has in mind, the mirror world of the Logos. So we move from sort of, as it were, the spatial world to the mirror. We make a mirror in the world. You can imagine somebody who is just going around and they're not too worried, there's no big problems. They're just, in fact, most of us, most of the time, completing our daily rounds, don't need this vessel of that carries philosophers. We don't need to take the second voyage, but it happens over the centuries. Carl Jung speaks of the movement of the ideas across the centuries, thinking of Hegel. That all kinds of pollutions come in to where it's very difficult. So that's one version. It's just we're so overtangled with these Hobbesian views, with our actual institutions being based on them to some extent, with the concept of the institutional structures, etc., that we can't reach it. We're too knotted up, confused. How can we reach the simple Einfach, or I almost want to quote the Edel Einfach and Grosse Stille of the in fact, that's in a way that's appropriate, right? Because this is the meaning of the this simple nobility of the ancients, Winckelmann, and also this was meant to be understood as the the Lay of the Men of the Myths, or the Dead, the great Siegfried epic. Was meant to be the one unpolluted mind with only very narrow but very vigorous produces this grand epic. Fritz Lang did a grand version of that, glittering, sort of not exactly black and white version of it. Was that the simplicity? I don't know. That's not exactly the simplicity, but that Strauss is striving for. But the point being, there's somewhere that you are, Natur, and then there's the Logo way. But now, does Strauss merely want to go there? So this is where Heidegger clearly doesn't want to go. Heidegger doesn't want to go back there. He's saying already there was something overlooked there. And he's saying this view, already there was overlooked the presupposition of being as the available things, and then at length of those natural things which, however, didn't grow, the so-called first things, which in a way this early Strauss wants to get to. In my opinion, I always thought before this Ghibellini book, I always thought that what Strauss was most concerned with was the fact-value distinction and trying to overcome that. I always thought that was the core of his later work, but in connection with Nietzsche and his early readers, Simmel and Weber, who took over the universities and who actually, in effect, really drove Strauss out of even the University of Chicago, which is so intelligent and based on the Prussian model. So I think he went to St. Andrew's College, I think it was called at some point. But yeah, so that's the theme that could be, that's just a bare vague touching on it, but I think this is a very important theme to say, yeah, couldn't we still say Heidegger is trying to get to a basic ground, but it's just not the same ground as the first Greek nature.